everybody. Welcome back to the full crew. Happy Monday. I am Dawn Zoldi, your co-host and CEO of P3 Tech Consulting.
Hey, and I'm Mike Peel, the other co-host, and we've got some great guests today. We've got Savanna Horan and Jeremiah Karpowicz. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, though. And let's start with Savanna.
Hey, hi, my name's Savanna Horan.
Oh, you lost your audio. Jeremiah, you want to fill in the air gap while she gets her audio going?
Sure. My name's Jeremiah Karpowicz. I'm the editorial director for Commercial UAV Expo and Commercial UAV News. I've been doing that for the past, four or 5 years. Was more on the news side for those first few years, but lately I'm a little bit more involved in the conference program side for the expo, which has been great to kind of connect everything.
Yeah,
Hey,
we're
Jeremiah,
former
I gotta
rivals.
say, I was gonna say while we're waiting for Savannah, are you good?
Am I?
Yes,
Yay!
you are.
Yes, go ahead. You're up.
Okay. My name's Savanna Horan. I am a senior robotics engineer for Phoenix Group Inc., which is a small communications company. I have put together our robotics lab, and I am working on making sure that communications for human-machine teaming and multi-domain heterogeneous robotic teaming is solid and reliable and can handle the data pull.
And Savanna is also our number 2 podcast of the year and number 5 of all time. Or top 5 of all time. She might be 4. So, quite the luminary we got here. We're excited to have Jeremiah on for the first time. And actually, you're also going to be first up on articles today. So, you shared with us something about LiDAR moving forward. I know that you have good history with your work at ComUAV, understanding the importance of LiDAR. And it seems like for a while there, like people were talking more about RGB. Is LiDAR having a comeback? And do you want to kind of dive into it?
Yeah, I mean, for a long time there was this because I mean, commercial UAV kind of came from the SPAR 3D conference, which was focused on laser scanning, and there was at the time there was so much conversation about photogrammetry versus LiDAR and which is better. And ultimately, I mean, the answer then is the same as the answer now, which is it's which do you want, which do you need, what are you trying to do? It's not a case of either or. But what really jumped out to me about this article was just about how many different use cases and how many different applications were being showcased in this. Like the Michigan Department of Transportation was called out. There were a few different road and bridge use cases that were laid out here, and it was just so striking because it's so much. I mean, Mike, you remember the early days of the drone conferences, the hype that was associated with the technology, and it was just so much about the potential and the possibilities. And I love potential and possibilities, but what we always heard from attendees and what we hear from our audience is what's actually being done. How is this technology actually making a difference in terms of faster, cheaper, safer, the bottom line ROI. And this article just laid out a bunch of different examples of what that can mean. And I think it allows a reader to really put themselves in the position of some of these folks to say, okay, here's a starting place for me. What it actually means for me to adopt this technology in terms of integrating it into my established workflow or process. That's always going to vary a great deal. But having these kind of specifics as a starting place is just really important, rather than the drones are great because they can give you an aerial view of things. Like it's just not enough.
Yeah, it was funny in those early days. Like not you had all those dreams and expectations, but you also like you said didn't have enough like meat to actually chew on for how they're actually being used. Right? You had this new form factor, allowed you to get closer to things at a more stable. And that's I think what led to photogrammetry being kind of the leader of interest at that time. But as you know, things scale down, or we find a way to integrate these two technologies in different ways, right? Think about all the sensors that are on drones now that weren't back then. And of course, the use cases just start to multiply. And it ultimately comes down to the users, right? Get the drones in the people's hands, and they find out what it's good for and what it isn't, and relay that back. So this is nice summary on it. Dawn, you added an article to the bunch. Did you want to highlight it?
Yeah. So jumping onto that, first of all, I wanted to tag back onto what Jeremiah just had and give props to Inside Unmanned Systems magazine. This is not like a shameless plug or anything, but I do write for them, and I do feel like their coverage, as Jeremiah said, is very thorough when it comes to specific use cases, and that LiDAR article is a great example. So props to Richard Fisher and Inside Unmanned for that piece. This piece just came out last week on Dragonfly, so they have just announced that they put out a long-range LiDAR system that it has improved resolution over normal conventional photogrammetry methods. So get this. This is from the article. It's able to produce 0.5 centimeter point cloud precision with 2 centimeter global accuracy, which ensures high resolution data at 2 million points per second. I mean, I don't know a lot, but that sounds really impressive. So I'm going to ask Savanna, who's the robotics expert. Like, that sounds pretty amazing that they're putting this out. And this is just, I think, one of many examples of LiDAR that are coming out from a bunch of different drone and other companies. And even at like affordable price points, which I think has been an inhibiting factor for the widespread adoption of LiDAR, maybe until more recently. So Savanna, what do you think?
I think the LiDAR technology is amazing. And hearing those numbers, immediately where my brain goes is that's a lot of data to transfer or process on board. But getting that minutia, getting that detail is really, really important, especially for the more and more difficult situations that robots are being put in. And you have the aspect of unknown maps, like they don't have the maps, they're going into unknown territory, and they may be working with humans, they may be working with other robots, they may be in a very trying situation like a jungle. They don't have this view, so having that kind of detail allows for a lot better and a lot safer use of the robots. And also, I just love within the article that Jeremiah had on there, it mentioned about layering the technologies and using them together, which I think is hugely important because every single technology has a weak spot. So if you can get that reiteration, then we can really push this field.
Yeah, so what you're talking there is like multispectral, basically. Like taking different sensors and combining those, the data from those to have one holistic picture.
Yes, because one of the things, like, I don't have really expensive LiDARs. I have little ones, and there's a certain black paint that is on poles in the building that I work in that it does not like. So I have been trying to bring in photographs like, hey, that's a solid object. You can't go through that.
Interesting.
So in terms of data processing, though, have companies, curious to hear both the on-the-ground and editorial kind of viewpoint on this, have companies started to kind of grapple with the data ingestion? Because I remember that being a huge problem 2 years ago. It's like, yes, we're so excited to have all this drone data. Where do we put it, and how do we actually weed through it? Who wants to go first? Savanna?
Yeah, I can jump in. From what I've seen, there have been two kind of main thoughts, depending on whether you're using a drone or air vehicle that has a lot less space and size, weight, and power is very important versus a ground vehicle. And there's also been, and that's more, how do you process it? Like, if you have all this data, do you send it back to a server that can handle it and then bring it back in? Or what I've seen a lot of technology inventors and like sensor inventors is trying to do that edge bit. So there's little cameras. I don't have one. Oh yeah, I have. This was a Kickstarter a couple of years ago.
Show and tell, love it.
Yeah, this little camera actually had AI, had processing on it, and had AI on it, and built-in algorithms. So you could do certain things like object identification of a box with just that right there before you started worrying about the pipelines.
Interesting.
Wow.
So can it pre-sort what would be like important data to even send back, or is it just for navigation or
It can
labeling?
hand, it can do a lot of things. With that one, it was saying like, okay, here's something I've noticed, and depending on what algorithm you were using, depended on whether it was like, okay, here's a human. You wanted me to tell you when there's a human. Here it is. With actual smart alerts is what I've termed it. I don't know if it has an official term. Is when you give it that master thing of like, I don't want to hear about anything else unless it fits this checklist. That's another way that I think people have been trying. I know I've been trying to handle things that way.
I mean that concept of what are you going to do with this data is still really prevalent just because everybody has very different needs. Like I can send a drone up and get 50 gigs, 100 gigs of data, but like where is that going? Who's doing what with it? And that's why that article you called out, Don, about that new uh, sensor from Dragonfly was striking because when I saw that, it was like that my mind flashed back to that concept of a complete drone solution, and that it was kind of this elusive elusive concept for a few years because vendors wanted to be able to say, you buy our solution and we'll give you the easy drone button because it integrates everything in ways X, Y, or Z. And the reality is that the complete a single complete drone solution it's not going to be applicable to everybody because people have so many different needs there. To Savanna's point, just in terms of what are you trying to do, is how does this get layered onto something that's already happening. In that article I called out too, the Michigan Department of Transportation was using drones to supplement their mobile based solution. And that's, again, that's not about replacing something they're doing, but tying it into it, and what that means in terms of data, what that means in terms of what goes where and who handles it. Like that all needs to be worked out. Like there's no easy drone button for that. And I think that's the piece that anybody who's looking to adopt the technology needs to get past, is that if you're looking for the easy drone button, it's not there.
Well, and what I love about what you're both saying is, being a lawyer, the answer really and what you're trying to achieve is it depends, right? The lawyer
Yeah.
answer, it depends. And we're seeing companies crop up like Key AI, who was also on the Donna Jones podcast in January as a CareSoft partner, where they're taking that back end data and analyzing it. And in fact, they've added augmented reality goggles for inspections of critical infrastructure where you could be 3,000 miles away and literally walking through a structure, during an inspection process. So, I mean, I just saw the other day somebody said, actually, you know what? It was AFCEA and GMU had an event about technology at the edge, Savanna. I think you
Mhm.
appreciate that since you just talked about this processing at the edge.
Yeah.
And a gentleman from IBM gave a talk, and he said, about space. And he said, the sky is not the limit. We often say the sky is the limit. The sky is not the limit when you think about all of these use cases and how this whole technology ecosystem is going to be employed for the good. In fact, real quick, on the topic of LiDAR, which being military, former military, I'm very sensitive. That is an acronym, everybody. If you didn't know that, fun fact, it means long range light detection and ranging, LiDAR, okay? And Fortune Business Insights issued a market report about global LiDAR. The market for that globally is going to be projected to reach 455 million US dollars by 2028 with a compound annual growth rate of nearly 18%. And that's just one sensor. So when you think about that technology and how it's going to exponentially grow and all the use cases that can come out of it, absolutely check out that Inside Unmanned Systems magazine to get a good feel for photogrammetry versus LiDAR. And also, Jeremiah, you didn't ask me to do this, but I'm going to give a shameless plug for your event. So Geo Week, I went to that in February in Denver, and I know it's going to be next February 2023 in Denver again at the convention center. It was awesome. I had never been to an event like that, and just to meet all the different companies that were, like you said, kind of multimodal, using all of these different sensors. I learned about this thing called uh, bathytopy. Did I say that right, Savannah? Okay, so super cool. Like,
Oh,
again, fun
bathymetry?
fact.
Yeah,
It's like the
bathymetry, yeah.
measurement. Yeah, the measurement of water at the edge of land and into the water. And, just it was like I was like such a kid in a candy store running around there, learning about all these different technologies. So props to you guys, DivCom, Jeremiah, and that event. So I commend that to everybody's attention, especially if you want to learn about LiDAR, because that is a big part of that event. But Mike, we have some really cool, so speaking of sensors and artificial intelligence, I think you and Savanna picked a similar article about a similar event. So why don't we kick that off?
Yeah. So actually, so this is the Mayflower, first autonomous ship to cross the Atlantic Ocean. So IBM had some hand in this. Um, Basically, you know what? I'm gonna let Savannah do a deep dive on it because she actually has the technical background to talk about how amazing it is. But I mean, this is kind of cool because if you think about freighters, they're trafficking the ocean, semi-autopilot systems or whatever. But this small little boat, fully autonomous, doing ocean research while it was covering the Atlantic Ocean. I think we're gonna be in a new era where there's basically almost these new life forms just trafficking the surface of the ocean.
Yeah, I love this. I love water. I love water robotics. And this is really fascinating with what they set up to do. Because you can see here kind of with the crane. Now there's a human on a couple of them. So it's not a super small boat, but compared to a lot of the freighters and stuff that are on there, this is a small boat going out in the middle of the water. So when they first were trying to ship and recreate the Mayflower, because it is Mayflower, a little bit of the history of it that got involved is the Mayflower sailed in 1620. So its 400-year anniversary was 2020. And that's kind of what gave this birth to this idea. And it's IBM partnering with a nonprofit, Promare, I believe, with MARE. And the website for this is www.mas400.com, which has live updates. And I followed it. I missed its launch because I was watching for the first one, and then they're like, "Oh no, we need to wait. We'll send you an email." I never got the email, but I kept checking the website, and I saw the dashboard, and it was halfway. It had already left the Azores and was halfway across to Canada. It was supposed to go straight to Mass, but this has full autonomy. They have IBM really pushed in a lot on that side. It seems like with their autonomous captain. And for education as well. So this is really focused on science and figuring out what they can do with this. And this is the first successful one of this length, because there has been a couple between San Diego and Hawaii. And I think from the other side, from Asia out to islands, but this is the first sea crossing as far as I'm aware. And they have 4 computational units on board. They have what they call their little stowaway. They have a chat bot that's on board as well that you can interact with, that can tell you jokes. And they have so many sensors on it that are just phenomenal. But they had to be very concerned. There was a few things that they had to be very concerned about as well. And one of them was weather. And it had to stop. It did an unplanned stop in the Azores, which is controlled by Portugal. So in the articles, sometimes you'll see it stopped in Portugal, kind of, for mechanical issues, because it can't heal itself. So you still needed the humans to be brought out. And in the harbor, due more to the International Agreement on the Coal Regs, which is an acronym, but essentially stands for who has the right of way in the open water. And it's an international agreement that's been around. I know Regs stands for regulations, but I forget what the COL is.
Yeah, it's the International Regulations for Preventing Collisions at Sea from 1972, so the COL regs.
Yep.
Is kind of one of those pinnacle regulations when you think about the law of the sea. So yeah, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt, but other than to just mention what that meant.
No, thank you. Makes the COL make a lot more sense. Collision regulations, there you go. But essentially it's like who has the right of way? Because like the air, the sea is kind of split into highways. Where that gets a little more confusing, a little bit more tenuous and dangerous is when you get close to land. So this ship did the full trip autonomously and then had to be towed into the Halifax harbor. Because even though they have full confidence that it could navigate this, it hasn't been legally approved until it becomes probably more common. Or they do kind of like we're thinking of with roads, is they have like a separate harbor, like an autonomy harbor over here maybe, or everybody's harbor over there. I don't know how that's going, but I just absolutely found this amazing because of what it was able to do and all the data that it was taking. And from being on the open water myself and thinking I had an iron stomach until I hit 6+ waves. Yeah, I'm happy to see this. I know a lot of scientists out there really want to do a lot of amazing work. And now they have the option also. I was thinking about this morning, where you have a scientist on a boat, let's say working with Woods Hole, and you have one of their boats and they're out there and they have all this data and they have all this data on this boat and it's very self-contained. And then they analyze it and then they make a conclusion. And let's say this is a mind-bending conclusion that everybody needs to know about. Now they have to communicate it back. With this, the data is collected and communicated back. So the analysis, while it could potentially happen on board, could also be happening back in land where you have multiple modes of communication. So you don't have, I think it can help make things faster, make things move faster, and possibly not lose information and give more scientists more ability to test this and gather the data that they're looking for. So,
yeah, I love this too, and I know Mike has a related article, and we want to talk about his a little bit and then peel them both back. But I have to say, Savanna, you mentioned a place called Woods Hole, and for people that don't know what we're talking about, it's in Massachusetts. It's right near Cape Cod. It is a hub of marine, biological, and autonomous vehicle research. I went there on vacation a couple of years ago with my family, and we toured, a bunch of these facilities, and it was just mind-blowing the things they were doing out there. So I just wanted to kind of mention that's when you said Woods Hole. Many people have never heard of this place, and I had the fortunate opportunity to visit that while I was on vacation. It was super cool. So, Mike, you have a related article. I know Jeremiah has a really an important question to ask about this whole concept of mass autonomous surface ships.
Yeah,
Actually,
just. Oh,
yes,
go ahead, Mike.
Sorry, no, I don't have a related article. It was we already showed it. So Jeremiah, you're
okay. I didn't know if you wanted to elaborate. Yep.
Well, yeah, no. Before we change subjects, then Savanna, just as you were talking through that, my head was just going right to how some of what's there could apply to UAM, AAM technology in terms of passenger drones. These larger drones that are either carrying cargo or people. Do you see any of the learnings from that being directly or indirectly applicable to the drone space?
yes and no. When you talk about carrying people, because if you look at the giant carriers right now, they're not making decisions, but they're pretty autonomous. They're being programmed and they kind of fly themselves, but there's always that human comfort. There's a human in there, and humans are very good at novel situations. So when things get really weird or something happens where it's not programmed, it's not understood, humans are actually better at that. Now, with the developments of autonomy that we're seeing in autonomous behavior, and then further on into the artificial intelligence? Could it be that when a novel, you can have someone on call, and when a novel situation comes up, they could take over? Maybe. But I think there's a lot of, before we put people fully saying, hey, this is a full autonomous thing that's going to be making decisions, and your life is being held by this thing that you may or may not understand, I think we're a little ways away from that. Not that the technology won't be ready when the humans are ready for it. But I think that's going to be a little cultural shift. Sorry, Dawn, go ahead.
No, that's all right. I would love to jump in because, let's take the passengers out of this equation for a second. I think there's two significant parallels. One is, as Savanna mentioned, all the different sensors that were on board this particular vehicle, which, by the way, was like 5 feet long. It was a trimaran. It spent 5 weeks on the open sea, powered by artificial intelligence. I think the sensor suite, there's a lot of crossover that you're going to see in the UAS and AAM area, including Jeremiah. LiDAR. They had LiDAR on board, okay? They had radar, sonar, LiDAR, GPS, all kinds of things. And then I think the other parallel is we just had Romeo Dersher on last week talking about this drone that they were using to broadcast acoustic sounds to try to lure an orca out of a river it got trapped in France and back into the open sea. And interestingly enough, on this particular vehicle, they had what they called the hydrophone that was capturing and recording whale and dolphin sounds. Now, like, you could see where that those sounds can then be employed on a drone, like in Romeo's use case that he brought up. And they were actually recording those, as Savanna mentioned. There's a lot of scientific research going on through this vehicle, and they were using those sounds to gauge population distributions. But you can imagine, once they have that data, what they can use it for. Other use cases involving drones, like Romeo's use case. So I just think there's so many parallels, and then of course the legal aspect, so many aspects of the law of the sea, as well as, how we're incorporating these autonomous systems into national and international airspace. A lot of work to be done. So those are the couple parallels that I thought as both of you were talking.
And another fun thing that just popped into my head is maybe some of the harbor testing and issues is you have like drone tugboats where they could be launched when you get towards a harbor, and
or at least observers, like secondary eyes, right? So that's a backup system. Yeah. Well, that's what I was kind of thinking about. Well, all right, so we have a few maiden voyages here to talk about, but what happens when this scales up to multiple versions of these rigs sending data back? Now we have a better idea of basically the ocean, right? What are the conditions, right? If we're able to, let's say, have hundreds of these running throughout the Atlantic Ocean, and they're all sending data back, this could improve the safety of sea travel overall, right?
Yeah.
But then some of that goes to what you were saying, Savanna, in terms of the technology being ready, but people being ready for it. Like, those can be two very different things.
Yeah, and in fact, the class I teach at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University Worldwide, there was a module on these mass autonomous surface ships, or MASS, they call them, MASS. The IMO, the International Maritime Organization, literally just finished a drill where they went through every potential treaty to determine, like, what language changes need to happen to incorporate autonomous ships. And this idea of, do we even call it a ship? Because that's a term of art. Is it a vessel? What are the legal ramifications? I mean, this is absolutely critical, and you can see where the legal issues keep going on and on. So more to follow on that, I think, on an upcoming event I'm going to do next year. But Mike, you wanted to talk about the follow-up. We just talked about Romeo's article from last week, but he also brought up this taser thing, right? With the Axon was going to have some tasers. Yep.
So we've got some new news on this. Savanna also found it. And it kind of goes to what you were just saying, Jeremiah. Are the people ready for it? So, You might remember the Taser Drone from Axon, which is a well-known taser manufacturer. But the ethics board, 9 people on the ethics board have resigned, and it looks like this project has stalled. So, um, who?
Oh yeah, no, they came out and said they're not. We put a pause on this, and that was after the initial announcement saying their ethics board did not recommend they move forward, but they still did. And then what was it? 2 or 3 days later, we're hitting pause.
So, what were the complications that caused this to fail, other than infighting, finger pointing, and bad PR?
As if that's not enough, Mike.
Well, one that they mentioned in this article was the, I guess I forget who said it, but it was probably somebody in a leadership position, let's put it that way, came out and was like, well, I just mentioned that I gave the press release okay because I just wanted to start the conversation. And it's like, okay.
While also starting development, like, those
yeah,
are 2 different things.
Yeah. Slightly different, but there's so many, even if we set the ethics to the side for a second, there's so many technical issues that this could happen because you're entering a chaotic situation with something that is not quiet. I have never heard a quiet drone. And then if you're inside and it's reverberating off the walls, and then are these walls shielded? Certain university buildings I've been in have been completely shielded buildings where signals had a lot of trouble getting in and out. So you have to look at those as well. And even with the ethics on the side, it's a very, very difficult technical problem.
Yeah, I didn't even, when I first saw that headline, I wasn't thinking at all about the technical challenges of it. My head went right to, this is not a great look for anybody. But yeah, that technical piece, I mean, there's so much they could build into that they wouldn't be able to actually guarantee because there's so many different situations where it could be applied.
Yeah, and quiet. That's one of the biggest things. Like in the movies, how have you seen a SWAT team move in? They're using hand signals so that they don't have like as minimal sound as possible. And you're going to send something in with 4 or more rotors in an enclosed space. I don't see how that's going to be very effective.
Well,
besides a distraction.
Well, it depends on the situation. Actually, a distraction is a
Yeah.
perfectly good use, but if it's a distraction, do you need the taser attached to it? I mean, the drone doesn't need to defend itself at that point.
Yeah.
You know, it also, these procedures have to be built up. You know, there's a manufacturer, Brink, who's building drones for this specific kind of infiltration type of circumstances. And part of their methodology is to actually train up officers. So if you're ever going to get to that point where it is something that's deployed regularly, it's got to be universal training. These people have to be trained to the teeth. And then also, there's still going to be failure points, right? So you have to know that you're deploying it at the right circumstances for the right purpose. And then now add the taser on top of it. We're about a century away before having a taser on the drone, if I have anything to do with it.
Well, were you guys encouraged by seeing how quickly that they went back on that? Because that was what was striking to me, was that, yeah, this doesn't seem like a good idea, but it's not like this lingered for a month or 6 months or a year. Like, I mean, we're talking 3 or 4 days later it was very quick, which I thought was striking.
Yeah, I want to pile onto that question and ask this group, do you think if it was a ground-based robot that had this taser on it, would it have been shut down so quickly? Would it have had the kind of the quick backlash and vocal backlash that it received? What do you all think? Because, look, local PD, they use ground robots all the time. So we've seen these spot of like quadruped UGVs, right, on uncrewed ground vehicles all over the place now for perimeter security. That's one thing. You could easily stick a taser on that thing's head. It doesn't have a head, right? They stick other things on top of it. And they routinely use robots to dismantle bombs, as an example. Okay, so do you think if this was a ground-based robot that it would have been shut down, and does it have this similar ethical concern. Does it raise similar ethical concerns or no? What do you think?
I think it's very interesting that you brought up a ground robot, because I don't know if anyone remembers, but I think it was Boston, maybe early.
Boston Dynamics?
No, 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 no. It's not a company. It's
Boston.
actually the
Oh.
location, Boston, Mass. There was a sniper behind a wall. He was in a building. There was a sniper behind a wall. I may be getting my locations mixed up. I remember the generality story, but they used a ground robot to go in and essentially almost take this guy out. And it caused an uproar once that came out, once how they did it. But it was not precise. It was literally taking a sledgehammer to the situation. So when you start talking about tasers, you have to worry about precision with that. And also, yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting. Now, if it was a ground robot, I think it might have been accepted, maybe, but I also wonder if it would have just been somebody having the idea and nobody finding out about it until it happens in the news, like that situation I'm referencing in the past.
Wow, so there's public outcry there.
I don't think we would have seen those headlines for a ground-based taser development.
It would depend on how autonomous it was, right? If like the headline is able to be written as Terminator robot takes out shooter, then you're in deep. But if it's, you know, something that's remote piloted and the story is shielded officers as they infiltrated a hostile, you know, area, people can kind of grasp that that's a use case that's not going to be deployed often. Everybody's concern is, will this be used against me whenever there's backlash, right? So,
well, and Mike,
yeah.
I think Danielle Gagne from Volatus has a great question. I don't know if you want to.
Let's go through all of these, because she put out a couple of things to chew on that I think are good. So, can we talk about the accuracy of the technology of tasers? Period. Can we expect the tasers to work as expected? Should robots carry anything that engage with humans to exert force, even if it's non-lethal, outside of military use cases? And just considering public perception and the role of public safety agencies and emergency response, I think we kind of touched on that a little bit here, but let's start with the accuracy of tasers. How accurate are tasers? Are they less accurate when you attach them to something flying?
Something I don't know about the flying aspect. That would have to be looked into. I know for tasers in general, there have been plenty of cases where like one prong goes in, and I think they have, in the ones that the police officers carry, I think there's 2 cartridges just for that reason. But I could be wrong.
Wow. So it has to reload. The drone would have to reload. How about you, Jeremiah? What do you think about just this concept of engaging with humans to exert even non-lethal force, whether it's ground or air-based robot?
Yeah, it's a good question, because is that framed in terms of the technology, or in terms of the legal element of it? Like, is that something we could or should regulate in terms of, should this be something that we're okay with?
Yeah, and Savanna just dropped another link in our private chat here. Do you want to tell us about this thing in Dallas?
Yeah, that was the one I was referencing. It was actually
I'll drop that in the
2016.
chat for everybody.
Oh, it's 2016, and they actually took out a sniper using a robot?
Yeah, Dallas. I remember this.
Yeah, they put explosives on the robot because of how he had corralled himself in, and they basically like blew the wall away that he was against.
And he died. The perpetrator died.
As far as I know, yes.
Wow. I mean, took out seems like I've read the article, so I apologize. I haven't seen it, but no, these are really great questions. I mean, ones that we need to grapple with, because, you know, having been in the government as long as I had, you know, I was a little bit Pollyannish and like, hey, it's all good. Like, we're just here to help. Like, we're the government. And I never understood that other perspective of people being concerned about the government abusing power until I saw it happen. in the last couple of years. And, you could we're not going to get into politics here, but, you can think back on some headlines. Some people called it a riot, some people called it a peaceful protest. And depending on what you called it, depended on what kind of force you could use, especially as a president, right? Under the Insurrection Act, etc. Using military in the city, in the District of Columbia, in unprecedented ways to clear out a crowd to take a picture. So when you think of a government that has that amount of power and then you add these tools to it, it can be a scary proposition, to be sure. But then on the flip side, you think of the Uvalde, Texas shooting that just occurred in that elementary school. And you think of that mom that was saying, go in there, like my kid's in there, and the cops are like, I don't want to go in there because they're going to shoot me. But if they had a robot that could have tased this guy, would that have been a better proposition? Would that have been the right use case? Perhaps, right? And once again, I think it all comes down to that lawyer answer, it depends. But I think this is a great segue, now that Danielle has asked this question about military use cases. Let's talk about this this final article. This is my article about how the Army has delayed their the publication of their multi-domain doctrine because they're watching what's happening in Ukraine. And what do we know is happening in Ukraine right now? Well, it's multi-domain. We've seen an unprecedented use of commercial drones on the battlefield. I mean, look, it's not news that commercial drones have been employed in battle, okay, or in conflict, or even by insurgents or bad guys. We know this. What I think is unprecedented and what the Army is watching right now is, holy shnikes, we have commercial drone companies partnering with nonprofit organizations, flying CEOs out to Poland, training Ukrainian forces and volunteers to use their commercial drones, and those forces are then using those drones in armed conflict. From everything from ISR, right, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, to mapping, those, let's call them those benign things that we think about that are so important, right, for awareness, battle space awareness, but then also for kinetic strikes. So I remember when I interviewed Red Cat Holdings, Rotor Riot, Chad, and I keep forgetting Chad's last name, and I'm sorry, Chad. It was a great interview. He was literally in Poland. And Rotor Riot, if you don't know, they create small hobby, very premier first-person view drones. And he said those forces were using their drones to drop grenades on people. Think about that for a second. So anyway, I'd like to get everybody's thoughts on this. I know I have my own, but I would love to, let's go with you first, Jeremiah. Like, what are your thoughts on this blurring now of lines and lanes of the commercial world, commercial drones onto the battlefield?
I mean, it's trite to say that it's a game-changing technology, but it really is. It was just looking at headlines just from today about the Ukrainian teen drone who's happy that they destroyed somebody. The drone that saved Kiev was piloted by a 15-year-old boy. I mean, that's somebody that had a drone and was able to provide what turned into military intelligence just from him flying his drone up and getting a sense of where that Russian column was. I mean, it's the lines are blurring in a way that makes me makes me a little uncomfortable, but like that's our world, and like that's to see it happening right in front of our eyes is striking.
What do you think, Savanna?
I think it's very intriguing on many levels, because I've gotten in discussions before with people where, like, especially with AI, with the concerns of AI and how far we're going to go with it. And I always like to joke around. I'm like, well, do you know that humans are still developing AI, so there's going to be flaws.
Until it can think for itself and be smarter than us, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
then we're going to be on a whole new world.
Yeah.
But so when you look at that, and they're like, well, we can't develop this technology because it's going to be used poorly, or it's going to be used in a way I don't agree with, or it's going to be used in a way that's not in my doctrine. And it's kind of like, well, The sword was the weapon of choice for a long time. Before that, it was a rock. And then from the sword, it was a gun. From there, it was a machine gun. From there, it was a tank. Like, there's always, as bad as it is, people are always going to take a technology that may have had benign uses initially and may have been intended in one way, and they're going to find a way to use it for what matters to them at that point. Now, with the crossing of civilian to military, I think the Ukraine is a very different field than what we've seen before, because it is civilians, essentially. And most of the force of the Ukrainian force is civilian. They may have done a few years in the military. I think they have conscripted service like Israel does. But a lot of them had left, but the men weren't allowed to leave because it's like their home, and this is what they're defending. So there's a lot layered in here.
Yeah.
And as much as you were mentioning, the government abuse, you can see that in governments all over the world.
Yep.
But a lot of times, I feel what the US has tried to do is they've tried to put so much red tape in the way that somebody somewhere is going to be like, hold on, wait a minute. And that's where I think a lot of the US citizen trust in the government comes in, because we know that it's not fast moving.
Yeah, there's definitely a bureaucracy. I'd love to get Mike's thoughts on this.
Yeah, so to Savanna's point about the weapon will be used no matter what, right? So like there's one of my thoughts with this stuff is proliferation, right? So unintended consequences of positive actions today. And weapons tend to have like a geospatial character to them where once whatever conflict and players have settled down from the previous war, now these weapons are available for other insurgents. They could be trafficked to other surrounding countries who have other similar issues and be utilized in ways that are unintended because they could be sold and they have a market value, right? So that's kind of the thing that I'm keeping an eye on with Ukraine, because the longer that things go on, whether it's the private sector that's providing these tools or governments, the more arms that are in that region, the more destabilization you might even see in the surrounding area over the course of half a decade from now.
Well, I could talk all day long about the implications of this to the law of war, because I think it has profound implications, but I think that's for another day and time, and maybe scholarly articles. So, fun fact, maybe I'll do that at some point. But I think it's Mike, to your point, and the fact that this is going to proliferate. I think about this is absolute job security for counter UAS companies. Think about this. And in fact, I interviewed General Paz, not just on our tilt last week, but for a piece I was writing that ultimately didn't make print. But what he said was, we as a military, uniformly trained for that threat coming across the hemisphere. We need to train for the threat coming across the parking lot, because if Ukraine has showed us anything, it's that if a number of commercial companies can partner with nonprofits and have such a tremendous impact, 15-year-olds, as Jeremiah said, on the battlefield, think about your hometown. When's it coming to a place near you? And I think that's what is so frightening when you think about this. It's because the lines are so blurred, it doesn't take a real leap of anyone's imagination to think like this could be happening like at Walmart tomorrow.
Can I jump onto that point really quick, Dawn?
Yeah.
So this kind of reminds me of kind of almost the admission, maybe that's not the most generous term, but the interest of the Army to invest in open source drone technologies, right? Like that seems like something
Oh
the
yeah.
Army wouldn't do in the past because it gives up the asymmetric information advantage that they're always seeking. But there was, and this is where I think it's an admission, is that there's a benefit to things being developed open and publicly in that they're more resilient because they've been tested by market forces.
Yeah.
And this is the issue that you're kind of bound to face here is now if these things can have dual use but were unintended for dual use, they are going to actually be more resilient and able to scale faster, and that's something that we're going to have to learn how to deal with like you said, countering technologies.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeremiah.
No, I was just going to say when you were mentioning of red tape and what it looks like for the Army or for some of these institutions to adopt a new piece of technology in a way that 15-year-old in the parking lot doesn't have to deal with. So like in some ways they could be better equipped for some of this than some of the biggest agencies in the world because of what they have to slug through to use a given piece of hardware or software or whatever it is.
Yeah, Daniela is out there in the chat again. She raises an issue that I think, as these commercial vendors and the Ukrainian forces, I think, have since learned, now that the Russians have settled in and they put their electronic warfare teams at work, which initially they were too busy to do this, right? The jamming, the spoofing, all of this is starting to really impact the viability and the utility of those drones on the battlefield. And so her question is, what's the implications of this jamming and electronic warfare on the the use of these drones? And I'd love Savanna's point of view because this is really kind of a technical question, right? Like, and it's not just on the battlefield. Commercial drones can be doing precision agriculture, and some jerk out there can decide I'm going to mess with this, and they can jam those signals, they can spoof those signals, which is tricking them, giving them bad information. Jamming is just prohibiting, I think, the conversation, if you will, for lack of a better term. So what do you think about this idea of resiliency in drones, and how far have we come?
I think it's going to be very interesting. I think we have a long way to go. I think a lot of people have been initially much more in the aspect of like zip lines charter, where it's like, how do I get medical devices? How do I help? How do I use this technology to move forward? And so with that mentality, there's been a lot more offensive movement, and you only really hear a lot of people talking about jamming, spoofing, and defensive things more recently. Like, think of when Heathrow got shut down because there was a drone in their national airspace. So I think that needs to be looked into a bit more, but I also think that that's one of those technologies that is very tightly held in government closets somewhere. Because
and it is here too because of jamming a drone signal is an FTC violation. So now you're not even dealing with the FAA, but you also are dealing with the FAA because it's aircraft. So it's complicated.
Or FCC, absolutely. The Federal Communications Commission.
FCC, thank you.
Well, that's okay. And there's there's so many three-letter soup agencies out there that, I'm sure the FTC would call it an unfair, deceptive trade practice. I'm sure there's a clause out there somewhere, 5 U.S. code on that. But the point is that I think these technologies are progressing. And just a real quick foreshadowing, actually this Wednesday on the Dawn of Drones, I'd commend this to your attention, we have Asaf Mansa. He's the CTO of Defend Solutions, and they're doing some interesting things in this space. So absolutely check us out Wednesday at 9 a.m. Mountain on the Dawn of Drones through Drone Life TV, because we're going to be tackling this issue of counter drone and how they're from Israel. And when you think of a place on the planet that is routinely attacked and jammed and spoofed from every single side every single day, I think Israel is your ultimate test bed and use case. And what we're seeing out of Israel is a number of companies arising that are doing incredible things in the cybersecurity, in the communication space for drones and autonomous vehicles. So anyway, more to follow there. But Mike, I don't know if in a couple minutes that we have left, if you wanted to talk a little bit about, because we didn't get to this last week, some of the upcoming events that people should check out.
upcoming in terms of stuff that we're doing this week, or just
well, we'll
places
get to
we're going
this
to be? Because there's a lot of places we're going to be too.
Places where everybody should be. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you're going to Energy Drone and Robotics Coalition next week, right? So
yeah, Houston, Texas.
Excited for that, and we got a couple broadcasts planned that are going to pop up. You'll see them in the title cards after. Then I'm going to be at the PX4 Developer Summit in Austin next week, and also at the Open Source Summit, which is going on in tandem. So those are exciting new events coming up. We also got tomorrow our Twitter Spaces with Ramon Roche from the Drone Code Foundation. That's the showrunner of the PX4 Developer Summit. And Ed Bucas. Where's Ed from, Don?
So Ed's from
Votix.
Votix.
Yeah.
You haven't heard of Votix yet.
But you will.
You
Yes.
will starting tomorrow. Here's why. They're doing this thing they're calling drone orchestration. And they spent 4 years.
Great name, by the way.
Yeah. Savanna, you totally need to be watching this because I could see a huge collaboration in the future between Phoenix and these guys. But they're out of Miami, and it's essentially a command and control. And not to steal Ed's thunder, but I talked to them a lot. I met them actually at AVSI Exponential. I was just walking by their booth, and I'm like, oh, this looks kind of cool. What do you guys do? And they're like, we're literally brand new. This is our very first show. This is our very first thing we're doing. And it took us 4 years to develop this technology. And what I learned was in a week, they presented something for a client to the FAA. In a week and a half, they got approval. Think of that timeline. The FAA gave them
That doesn't happen.
in a week and a half.
Certainly
So
doesn't
that
happen.
should tell you something. So that's the ginormous teaser to join us tomorrow with Ed and Ramon on Twitter Spaces. So not on the podcast, on Twitter.
Yeah, only on Twitter. So follow us on Twitter right now. We're the full crew there, and you'll be notified as soon as our space goes live at 11. So you already covered Dawn of Drones. That's Wednesday. You got Drone Law Connections on Thursday, as usual. And then Saturday, we got something special you want to tell people about, all right?
I do. I want to talk about Saturday. But before I do that, I would be remiss not to mention, of course, a little bit out a little bit further. Do not miss commercial UAV in fabulous Las Vegas. It is one of the favorite things I do every single year, and it's going to be Jeremiah, September 8th. Is that like right after Labor Day again?
Yeah, the 6th through the 9th, I believe.
Yeah, I think so. I feel like the 7th is Labor Day. I could be wrong, but so a great week of activities this year at Caesar's Palace. The fun fact, the location of the Hangover film, the original. So, let's not repeat that necessarily, but let's have an absolute blast getting together as an industry. I think it's going to be so much fun.
No, thank you, Don. So, the 6th through the 8th at Caesars in Vegas, and we've got the kind of starting place for our conference program. More to be announced and when them will be available. But yeah, we're looking forward to seeing everybody there.
Yeah, it should be. I got my tickets. I'm all ready to go. And last but not least, I do want to plug this Saturday. If everybody was not tracking, the FAA is doing their Drone Safety Day on Saturday, the 18th. And we at Full Crew, Mike and myself, are going to do a special broadcast to help everybody celebrate Drone Safety Day. And we're going to be restreaming an exclusive video involving, Kevin, the drone guy, Morris from the FAA, and Dave Kraus from Influential Drones, Greg Reverdo from the Pilot Institute. I mean, the list goes on and on, but bottom line, it's kind of a parade of drone pros giving their perspective on Drone Safety Day. So join us Saturday as well for a special presentation. We've got maybe a minute left, so I don't know if Savanna or Jeremiah want to kind of give your 30 seconds, and then Mike, over to you to close us out.
Okay. I don't have anything really big coming up right now, but I'm working on some really fun projects, and hopefully my patent, I'll get notification any day that it's officially a patent, which would be great. It's patent pending right now, and it's the Merlin. We talked about this on Dawn of Drones, so you guys can look it up there. But it's
go back to that episode.
Merlin.
Yeah, the Mobile Land Radio Network, Merlin.
Mobile Robotic LTE Network. Yes.
Oh, Mobile Robotic LTEs. Thank you. Merlin. MRLN.
MRLN.
Acronyms.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Another acronym. All right. Thanks, Savanna. Jeremiah.
Yeah, no, really appreciate the plug for Commercial UAV Expo. Please do join us in Vegas, September 6th through 8th. You can follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter. And then for articles, you can Commercial UAV News. But as Dawn said, Inside Unmanned Systems and obviously Drone Life with Miriam. Those are two places that you should check out in tandem or even before Commercial UAV News.
Awesome. Thank you.
All
Mike,
right.
over to you to close us.
Yeah, so thank you everybody for joining us today. It's been another amazing full crew. Thank you to our guests, Savanna and Jeremiah. I'm going to post something in the chat right now. Here are all the links for the week. You can check out stuff from Savanna. Also link into our clubhouse, or Dawn's clubhouse on Thursday, Twitter Spaces tomorrow, so you can't miss us. And yeah, out here.